Hello! This will be a demonstration of Proposition 12 from Book 9 of Euclid's Elements, which says that if numbers be in continued proportion beginning from the unit, then any prime number which measures the last number also measures the number second from the unit. We're given four numbers A, B, C, and D, which are continually proportional beginning from the unit. So the unit is to A, just as A is to B, just as B is to C, and just as C is to D. What we want to prove is that any prime number which measures the number D, which is the last, also measures the number A, which is the second from the unit. For if this is not the case, then there will be some prime number E, which measures D and does not measure A. So let's make that number, call it E. So E is a prime number, it measures D, but it does not measure A. But because it is prime and it doesn't measure the number A, then we know from Proposition 729 that E and A are prime to each other. That Proposition 729 tells us that any prime number is prime to any number which it does not measure. So E being a prime number and not measuring A is therefore also prime to A. What we're going to do next is we're going to create the number F, and F will be created such that E times F makes D. We know that the number F exists because the number E measures the number D. So we're just going to fill that multiplication with the number F. So E times F makes D. We also know that A times C also makes D. How do we know this? Well, we know from the previous proposition 911 and its porism that A measures D according to C. And we can turn this into a statement about multiplication and say also that A times C makes D. So we have two products which make the same number, so combination 1, they're equal to each other, so that A times C is equal to F times E. But we can then turn this into a proportion by Proposition 719 and say that because A times C is equal to F times E, A is to E just as F is to C. But we also know that A and E are prime to each other. We proved that in our second step. And we know prime numbers are also the least in their ratio. That's Proposition 721. And furthermore, we know from Proposition 720 that the least numbers in a ratio measure any other numbers in that same ratio, the same number of times the antecedent, and the consequent. So that because A is to E just as F is to C, and A and E are prime to each other and are therefore least, A measures F the same number of times that E measures C. Not all of that statement is important to us, we just care about the fact that the number E measures the number C at all. What we're going to do next is we're going to create the number G in a similar way to how we created the number F. By this I mean that the number G will be made such that E times G makes C. Or that E measures C, we proved that in our previous step. E measures C according to G, which is just the same as saying that E times G makes C. Now, we can prove in a similar way that E also measures B. How we go about proving this is we know that A times B makes C, so E times G equals A times B. We convert that into a proportion, and then we say that A is to E just as G is to B, but A and E are prime to each other, so A measures G the same number of times that E measures B, but we just care about the fact that E measures B at all. We're going to create our final number H in a similar way to how we created F and G, such that E times H makes B, or in other words, E measures B according to H. Now, we know that the number B simply is the square of A. We know this from Proposition 9-8 because it is the third from the unit, and we know that it is the square of the number that is second from the unit. So B being third from the unit is therefore the square of A, which is second from the unit. So A squared makes B. So again, we have two products, A times A and E times H, which make the same number. So combination 1, they're equal to each other. So that E times H is equal to A squared. And we can again say by Proposition 719 that E is to A just as A is to H. But again, because E and A are prime to each other, they're the least in that ratio. That's proposition 721. So we can then say, again, by proposition 720, that E measures A the same number of times that A measures H, but we just care about the fact that E measures A at all. And the reason we care about that is because, well, the start of the reductio here was to assume that E does not measure A. But we've just shown that if E does not measure A, it also measures A, which is obviously absurd. And so we can conclude that the number E does in fact measure the number A. And this is what we set out to prove, that any prime number which measures D also measures A. And we've just shown that there can be no prime number which measures D and does not measure A. So we've proved that which we set out to prove, therefore, etc. Q, E, D. There is another way you can say this proposition. That is that if a prime number measures a power of a given number, it also measures that number itself. So perhaps a particular example to elucidate this, we know that the number 3 measures the number 216. Now 216 is equal to 6 cubed. So we know that 3 measures 6 cubed. So what this proposition allows us to then say is that 3 measures 6 itself. That's easy enough to verify. How we get this statement about prime numbers measuring powers of bases and therefore also measuring the base itself is kind of easy to get, but it might be a little confusing. So let's say we just start out the continued proportion, start out at 1, then we go to 6, then we go to 36, and then let's end at 216. We know that any prime number, or at least what this proposition tells us, is that any prime number which measures the last number, 216, measures the number 6 as well. But we know the last number will always be a power of the number that is second from the unit. Any number in a continued proportion that starts with 1 and 6, any number after that is a power of 6. We know that from proposition 9, 8, and a little extra work can tell us that. So yeah, this proposition tells us that if a prime number measures the power of any base, then it therefore also measures the base itself. That's the same thing as saying this proposition. That's all I've got to say about this video, or about this proposition, I'll say. So I'll end the video here and move on to proposition 9.13.